Dick Loudon loves Thanksgiving at home the way children love Christmas, so naturally, a series of unforeseen events nearly ruins it until three wise men save the day. Battle of the Network shows. Join Rick Brooks and Mike Kogel as they explore the TV of the 70s and 80s through hand-picked episodes of their favorite and not-so-favorite series.
Welcome to Battle of the Network shows. I'm Mike.
And I'm Rick. Hello, everyone.
And today we're coming to you from balmy Vermont. No, we're not. Wouldn't that be great if we could go to the Stratford Inn and record our podcast from there?
I think that would be a hospitable place to talk some television and enjoy the surroundings.
Yeah, get a nice meal or two.
Yeah, soak up some Vermont atmosphere.
Yeah, maybe get some maple syrup, whatever else they have in Vermont.
Foliage.
We
could look at some foliage.
Ben and Jerry's, they're in Vermont, right?
Probably.
You can enjoy some socialism.
What?
And and meet some deadpan people. I think that would be the most fun part, meeting the people.
Yeah, I think it might be the most fun and also in some ways perhaps the most aggravating.
Yes.
Or irksome, maybe would be a better word.
Yeah. And I don't know, the people who live in whatever town Dick Loudon lives in might not fancy podcasts. That might be too new for them.
Yeah, it might be a little more than they can handle, and I don't know if I'd want to be the one to explain the concept of a podcast to them.
Although I could imagine Larry, Daryl, and Daryl somehow having a podcast.
Yeah, they'd probably be a big hit. They would certainly have a unique point of view.
Yeah, I don't know how it would work exactly. I guess Larry would just have to speak for all of them as usual.
Yeah.
But,
can you imagine Larry doing some of the ad reads?
I can, yeah. So if you came into this blind somehow, didn't know, but we're going to talk about Newhart, the 80s, Bob Newhart's 80s follow-up to the Bob Newhart Show.
And his predecessor to Bob.
Yes.
I think we should start referring to Newhart as the predecessor to Bob, rather than the successor to the Bob Newhart Show. But we can try that and see if it sticks. But just an idea.
Was Bob the one where he was a cartoonist?
Yes, it was.
Okay. And
so I guess that was his '90s sitcom. I guess.
Yeah. Was Judd Hirsch in that too?
That was George and Leo.
George. Okay, that was after. Yeah. Boy, and I never really saw either of those. So.
Bob is pretty good. Underrated show. But yeah, Newhart, and I guess it's a special occasion we're celebrating with the subject and just in this special day.
Thanksgiving.
Yeah, happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
Yeah, I know you're not, it's not a big holiday for you.
It isn't. I'm not a big fan of Thanksgiving food.
Mm-hmm.
And I was never one to get super excited about it. But I think given these troubled times, I've grown to appreciate holidays like this more. And you know what, Mike? I think this year has given us a lot of perspective on what we're truly thankful for.
Yeah.
So I would just like to take a moment to say thanks to who I've discovered more than ever are the real heroes out there, the people that we should celebrate and give thanks for in a day like this.
Mm-hmm.
And you know who that is?
Mm-hmm.
I'll tell you who that is.
Yeah, I'll let you tell me.
I think the real heroes out there, of course, and the ones we're thankful for and the ones that we should celebrate are video collectors and people who post things on YouTube and Dailymotion and other video sites and make them available through different venues because they're preserving television history and letting us see it. And those are the real heroes, and I want to applaud them on this day of giving thanks. Thank you to all of you who have preserved this and shared it with the rest of us.
It's an excellent point you make, especially with a show like this that shouldn't be hard to find, and yet is.
Yeah, I didn't want to get too emotional, but I might have to take a minute here. But
yeah,
it came from the heart. I felt it needed to be said.
Just pick up one of your dinner rolls and
yes,
dab your eyes if you need to.
I will. I will.
Yeah.
But you bring up a good point, though. Why is it so hard to find Newhart? Now the whole show is on DVD.
Yeah,
but I know for a while some of it was on Hulu.
Mm-hmm.
But for this episode, we had to do a little digging because Newhart is not available on any of the mainstream streaming sites.
Yeah. I have a one theory after
Okay.
watching an interview with the show's creator, Barry Kemp. He mentioned that in order to get Henry Mancini to do the theme song, Henry Mancini would retain all the rights.
What?
Yeah, I guess when you're Henry Mancini, you get a little more control than other theme songwriters. So possibly it's a music rights issue.
Is this why What's Happening hasn't been on Netflix for all these years?
It could be, yeah.
Ugh, this is a stunner.
I know. I mean, he didn't put that part of it. He just mentioned it in passing, and I don't know.
Huh.
It's one theory. Maybe Bob Newhart just doesn't like streaming. Well,
I,
like the Bob Newhart show is on, or portions of it are on Hulu, right?
I believe that the whole thing is available there now, and it took a while.
Yeah,
And some of these other Fox shows or MTM production shows, it took them a while,
right.
but they're mostly there now. But I think Newhart is maybe one of the most disrespected major shows out there, and the fact that it's not more widely available is really puzzling to me.
Well, now that Disney owns it, maybe they're really giving it the treatment it deserves, a full remastering.
Yeah, and
So,
I can't wait to see it on Hulu with as Disney's Newhart.
yes.
They'll have Disney's The Bob Newhart Show and then Disney's
No, no,
Newhart.
yeah. Uh,
But I mean, 8 seasons and 184 episodes. This was a
yeah,
show that it was never maybe one of the biggest hits, but it was a solid performer. It's
yep.
fondly remembered, and I'm really surprised it doesn't get more love. But I do think that's related to something that I would like to rant about when we get a chance. But
Okay.
I do find it very surprising that we had to go a hunting a little bit to find Newhart. It wasn't
Yeah,
hard to find, but as far as getting like good quality
right.
presentations of the episodes, it's tough to do that right now.
Yeah.
Although it did, I think eventually it did come out on DVD. But even that, I think, was licensed out to Shout Factory. They
Mhm.
essentially put out most of the series. So yeah, Newhart is maybe not remembered as proportionately as it should be.
Yeah. Now I have not the theory. I think this holds out. The Newhart is probably the last great MTM sitcom. Like they were around, I don't know, another 10 years after it ended or something.
Hmm.
And there's a whole list of other shows they did, but
I'm
none of them
thinking,
stand out.
was there at least maybe one with Mary Tyler Moore herself?
Yes,
I'm trying to think of like other
I
ones.
think
You're onto
maybe.
something. Yeah.
I thought maybe Coach was one, but it's not, since the same Barry Kemp created that too, but
Yeah.
apparently not. So it seems like to me it is. And then you didn't really hear about them anymore in the 90s, even though
Yeah.
again they were making stuff, but they sold it at some point, and it went through a number of hands before however it ended up in Disney's hands through I guess through Fox, but Fox got it by buying Family Channel and all that strange
Wow.
stuff. So, which
Quite.
even that seems weird that Pat Robertson would buy a company known for doing sort of edgy TV
Yeah. Some of the more progressive sitcoms, maybe with the.
and dramas too. I mean,
Yeah, that's right.
probably more the dramas, but and Newhart is not. It doesn't fit that. I don't think it's particularly edgy, but certainly some of those dramas and the Mary Tyler Moore Show and Rhoda and things we're dealing with issues that maybe wouldn't fit the Pat Robertson mold. You would think.
Right, or at least you could say that MTM was known for some of the more maybe urban kind of sitcoms.
Yeah.
Bob Newhart show, I would think of that way as a more adult-oriented, sophisticated show. Mary Tyler Moore show, I mean, granted Minneapolis, but even shows with Midwestern locales, I would consider these kind of urban type sitcoms, and
Yeah.
as opposed to like a lot of the more popular, maybe even popular in syndication sitcoms. Maybe something like Happy Days.
Right.
Things like that seem to thrive in syndication in the 80s and maybe early 90s. But those would be shows that I would think of as more of a fit for something like that.
Yeah.
And I don't remember Newhart itself. I guess it was syndicated.
Yeah.
Again, I don't think not as much as a show with this many episodes was. I didn't encounter it a lot after it was off the air, I think.
Yeah. I'm sure it was on TV Land or something, but I remember watching reruns while it was still on.
Okay.
Like it went into syndication while it was still on, being able to kind of catch up on it. Similar to the way I watched Cheers, like a
Yeah.
mix of watching it as it was on in rerun.
It's a show that I did not really watch very much at all when it was on, for reasons that we can get into later. But then I think in this century, I remember WGN America, of all places, had some kind of throwback retro, however they branded it, some kind of deal where they were putting some older sitcoms on. And I started recording Newhart off there and kind of filling in a lot of the gaps on that and learned to appreciate the show a lot more than I had before. And I think that's when I watched like the bulk of the episodes was on that syndication run on WGN. And that was probably not too long ago. I'm guessing maybe 10 years ago when they were doing that. They were showing that in Barney Miller and things like that. And I think it bounced around like on some more obscure cable channels. I know like American Life bought rights to some of these Fox MTM sitcoms and were showing them then. So I think I went a long time probably without watching Newhart, and then kind of got back into it. And I remember reading his autobiography and being interested, kind of in revisiting some of that. And yes, that's kind of where I am with Newhart. But I did not watch it much at all when it was originally on.
I watched it quite a bit, and I think maybe it was one of those rare shows that everyone in my family liked and could watch together. It hit enough for the right buttons.
Hmm.
My brother and I liked it, I know, and I remember my dad watching it, and I'm sure my mom liked it. And it just, I think because it's not, again, not particularly edgy or even adult. I don't think in the same way. I mean, it's about adults. It's not about kids, but it doesn't have some of the more adult ideas that even like Cheers would have. But it's still sophisticated and yet silly comedy. And I may have mentioned this when we talked about Cheers, but besides Cheers, I would say this is the other sitcom that I learned a lot about, humor coming from who people are and not necessarily them just cracking jokes.
Right.
Dick cracks some jokes, and that's about it. Everyone else is just, it's who they are and their sort of idiosyncrasies that make it funny and his reactions. I mean, that's, of course, maybe the uniqueness of Bob Newhart, that it's all about how he responds to people.
Right. And it's funny because Bob Newhart is notorious for not wanting to have kids on his shows. And I don't mean to call him out for that. I kind of respect that he
No.
stood by that.
Yeah.
But and I would certainly not call Newhart like a juvenile show or one that was aimed for kids, but I could kind of see like kids being attracted to the Larry, Daryl, and Daryl characters, and maybe even the Stephanie character. There's aspects of it that I could see kids being sort of fascinated by. I personally was not as a kid so much, but I do remember that my dad really liked the show, and I didn't watch it on my own a lot. But another kind of thing going into this that I realized when I was kind of looking into this for the podcast was that the show was on mostly Monday nights, but it was on kind of in later time slots, like maybe 9:30 a lot. And one bizarre season, it even started the fall. I think in 1989, it was at 10:30 on Monday nights.
10:30.
I don't think that lasted very long. That was the year they had Famous Teddy Z and some other things that didn't last. But they tried to go for like a 3-hour sitcom block, but it seems very weird. Even a show like Newhart that you could see, appealing to a more adult sensibilities. To put it at 10:30 p.m. seems a little silly, but I guess, and it was on against Monday Night Football for a lot of its run too. But
yeah, a sitcom at that late just doesn't feel right.
no, not in first run. I mean, it's weird because
No.
I wouldn't think of anything of it if it was on like TV Land or something. Like, oh, this seems about right. But
Yeah,
just like CBS putting something on at 10:30, it's like, this is pushing it a little bit. But
and even just 6 sitcoms in a row, or
yeah,
8, or 6. I can do
yeah,
simple math.
be 3 hours, 6 sitcoms.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that feels like too much. I don't know why. It just seems like too many changes of pace.
Yeah. Well,
you need an intense drama to work off all that adrenaline.
to help you wind down at the end of a long
Yes.
day. After those laughs and a hard day at work, you need an intense drama to get you fired up to watch the 11 o'clock news.
Right, and then you need Johnny Carson to bring you back down again.
Yes. And then you need Tom Snyder to really kick it up a notch and
Yeah.
have you end on a high note.
That might explain why people were using substances a lot then.
In the
just to watch just to watch network TV.
Yeah. It took artificial means just to get through a night of primetime television.
Yeah.
And for our 2 to 11-year-old audience on this Thanksgiving, we mean like Nestle's Quick or things like that, Pixie Sticks that might help you through things. We do. I'm sure I can imagine today on Thanksgiving, a lot of our listeners have their whole families or listening to us talk about Newhart while they're preparing the turkey and all the trimmings and.
Yeah, for our international listeners, Thanksgiving is a big American holiday, if you're not aware. For some reason, we eat turkeys then. And we're supposed to be giving thanks for what, our country, or the fact that the Native Americans and the Pilgrims got along one winter.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the story. I'm sure Linus tells the story on
Yeah,
Thanksgiving special, but
I'd suggest folks, maybe backing up and maybe listening to us early, and then saving maybe another Thanksgiving special to understand the history of Thanksgiving. This might not be the place you want to go today, but
right, yeah.
But I feel very festive, and I'm glad to be celebrating Thanksgiving with everybody. And
yeah,
I might have an extra dinner roll because I do love, a brown and served dinner roll. That was my favorite Thanksgiving item, I think.
Yeah, I crescent roll too. I like
yeah,
those
are good.
Thanksgiving. These are the things because it's now family living elsewhere and things. I usually spend Thanksgiving on my own, and I try to at least have crescent rolls and canned cranberry and olives.
Yeah,
those are things we had every Thanksgiving. I don't know why the olives, but we did. We usually have some green olives, some black olives, and my brother and I both still try to maintain that tradition. And although I know, I'm sure homemade cranberry it's better for you and presumably better. The one or two times I had it, I didn't care for it. The just jelly in a can, on the other hand,
that sounds pretty good. Yeah,
and it's got the ridges, so you can where to slice it. And
well, it's good to have traditions on Thanksgiving. I think that's another
mm-hmm.
thing that we can say for our international listeners is Thanksgiving is maybe all holidays are about tradition, but to me, Thanksgiving in particular is about ritual and Thanksgiving, and people like to celebrate it like that. And I know one thing that we're going to be doing in our house, maybe even right after we talk about Newhart, is our now annual tradition of listening to Ed McMahon sing "It's Thanksgiving Day" at the Macy's parade from the early 1980s.
Yeah.
To me, that really gets me. It doesn't feel like Thanksgiving until Ed, sets the table with that. But
right. Well, I might have to do that too.
Yeah, I'd recommend it.
And in TV and movies, I guess, to me, there are two Thanksgiving traditions. Either you have the family getting together and bickering, but then sort of getting their act together. And that seems more like a movie thing, like the Wacky Family, where everyone is dysfunctional and it all comes out of it. Thanksgiving or Christmas, or as we're going to see in this episode, it's sort of a disaster. A lot of happenstance leads to it not going the way it should, but then it all comes together again. The Peanuts Thanksgiving special is another good example of that.
Mm-hmm.
And
a lot of times, like people that aren't necessarily biological family, but your makeshift family,
right,
coming together as the de facto family that they've become.
Yeah. And when I think, besides the Peanuts, the other classic Thanksgiving TV show I think of is the Cheers episode where they have a food fight.
Yes.
I know there are many others, but those are the ones that come to mind.
Yeah, that's a good one. And actually, one of the most famous, well, there's a couple of famous ones. There's the WKRP one that is beloved, and one of the most famous shows or episodes of the Bob Newhart show, the original one, was a Thanksgiving episode. So it's kind of interesting that we're celebrating Thanksgiving by talking about Bob's second hit sitcom. But the Bob Newhart show, the original run, had a memorable Thanksgiving episode as well.
Yeah, that is a show I don't have a lot of familiarity with. I really need to spend some time watching some of that.
Yeah, it's something like Bob Newhart is worth watching in everything and anything he does, and that's a real quality show, and I'm sure we'll get to that at some point.
Yeah.
Now, as far as Newhart, now we've got kind of a lot to get into. Now, I have my rant I would like to make.
Okay.
And I think it might be more appropriate if I get this out of the way before we get into the actual episode, if that's all right with you.
Is this about how no one wears pants?
This is what? No, I don't think so.
Is it about? No. And it's not about dogs having pet dogs.
No, I'm not. That's a really tough conversation on this day of coming together. I don't want to divide our audience with that again.
Okay. Yeah.
I think it was worth bringing up, but I don't have any easy answers to that, and I think that's going to have to continue off air.
Okay, I'm going to let you rant.
Okay. Here's the one thing that gets me about Newhart. It's very difficult to find even a lot of information about the show. I mean, you talked about seeing an interview with Barry Kemp. Barry Kemp, I think, worked on Taxi, and then afterwards he created or co-created Coach. what about the other people that worked on the show? I mean, like Sheldon Bowl. How much do you know about Sheldon Bowl, for example? And here's my problem. Do you know a lot about Sheldon Bowl, Mike?
I'll jump in with what I know after you rant.
Okay. So, here's the reason I think, and what one of the problems that I have with the show is that everybody talks about the finale. Okay. Now, I love the finale. It's one of the most memorable series finales of any show. It's been talked about to death. But now, when you go for information, like even the Wikipedia page for Newhart, I think about 80% of it is information about that memorable finale. Now, it's worth talking about. It's very interesting, but I think it does the show a disservice to really focus on that. And I actually have a quote from Entertainment Weekly a few years ago. They reunited, I think, the cast of Newhart, and Julia Duffy said this, and I quote, "I do hope people will talk about the other 183 episodes. There were gems in there. If we didn't have this iconic last episode, these things would get brought up and talked about sometimes, but we always talk about the finale." Now, I don't think she meant it like in a contentious way, but I think there's a little disappointment there that, including this article I was reading in Entertainment Weekly, all anybody wants to talk about is that series finale. And as a result, I think, as she mentions, there's 183 episodes that get crowded out, and a lot gets lost along the way. And I think that contributes to some of the diminishing of the show in the public consciousness. Great finale, but I'm glad that we picked a different episode. We can certainly talk about the finale, but I'm a little tired of reading about the finale. There's so much else about the show that I'd like to learn more about. And that's my rant.
I think that's a good rant, and it's similar to your comments on St. Elsewhere, that the finale kind of overwhelms the rest of the show. And as far as what I know about Sheldon Bull is he seems to have a decent amount of credits on IMDb. And I know he worked on Coach too. And I think, I don't know, I don't understand, I never understand what that developed by credit means. So in the credits for Newhart, it says created by Barry Kemp, developed by Sheldon Bull. So I thought, oh, maybe Barry Kemp just wrote the pilot and then Sheldon Bull was kind of running it. But Barry Kemp was there for the first two seasons, as was Sheldon Bull, and then they both left. So I don't know. Maybe he was working with Bob Newhart first at MTM to develop a show, and then Barry Kemp came up with this pilot. But this interview is another one of those Academy interviews, and it's like an hour of Barry Kemp talking about Newhart, and it gives a lot of good insight into the creation of it, which it was reel 2 of 4, and I didn't see reel 1, so I think I missed a tiny bit, like how he got from Taxi to MTM to this. But he talked about a meeting with Bob and kind of going over ideas, and all he had was an idea of him being in New England for some reason, and Bob Newhart had an idea of being in the Pacific Northwest because one of his kids had just started going to Gonzaga University, and so he kind of liked the Pacific Northwest. And then he said, either in that meeting or the second meeting, like Bob Newhart mentioned, like, maybe I could run a hotel or something. And Barry Kemp is like, work at a hotel, not like be the desk manager at a hotel or the concierge. And Barry Kemp didn't like that because he didn't like the idea of Bob Newhart being subservient to people. So then he thought about it and figured out this idea. Well, it could be an inn that you own, and then you're not subservient to anyone or a toady to anyone.
I love that. Let me just jump in. I love that phrase. Bob Newhart is not subservient to anyone. I like him, like taking a big like broadcasting on the set during production. Like Bob Newhart is not subservient to anyone.
Yeah.
Quite frankly. I do love that phrase. So yes, thank you. But sorry to interrupt. But yes.
Yeah. And then it kind of grew out of that. That was interesting. And he had some other insights about some of the casting changes that I thought were interesting. So the first two seasons, there's this guy Kirk who's the neighbor, and the first season there's a different young woman working as their maid. And he said in the case of Kirk, the CBS didn't care for that actor very much, and he liked him and liked writing that character, but I guess the actor started to. He knew CBS didn't like it, and there was tension, and eventually it just wasn't going to work. And with was her name Leslie, the maid?
Yeah, the first one, yeah.
Yeah, and he said like the idea of her, because she's this young woman who's part of a wealthy family, but she's good at everything, and like he said, the idea of her in the pilot works as a good thing for Bob to react to, or Dick to react to, but then there's kind of nothing left. to do with her after that. And so they knew that wasn't working. And then Julia Duffy did a guest shot as her cousin in the first season and did so well that they realized that they wanted to bring her on. And her energy was different. That was the other thing that he talked about, her and Peter Scolari as Michael and the Kirk guy too, all having a different energy than Bob Newhart and like Tom Poston, who are very, low key. And those characters and actors are very energetic, and that created an interesting tension. And then Stephanie and Michael are so weird that there was always something for Bob to play off.
And as a result, now it's almost like the night court phenomenon where many people don't even realize that you had a couple of whole seasons before Stephanie and Michael. You had this Kirk guy. I was watching the pilot with a friend of the show, Lori, and I don't think she even remembered the Kirk character at all. And I think her experience would be shared by a lot of people who would revisit the show now. For a lot of people, the show doesn't really start until like season 3 when you get what we think of as kind of the main cast, kind of like in the way Night Court had kind of different people at first, and people forget about those early episodes.
Which is weird because that's when the creator left. But Stephanie was there in the second season, so And I think Michael comes in at the end of the second season or as a guest star. So like they start having Dick be on TV somewhere in there, and Michael's involved in that.
Yeah, and that becomes a significant part of the show where he's not just a how-to book author and an innkeeper. He's a TV host, and
that's very local TV.
Yeah, and I mean
but
that's one.
His ego a little bit.
Yeah, well, and speaking of ego, I mean that's one thing. Bob Newhart is beloved now, but he was not a pushover, and I wish I still had his excellent autobiography. I shouldn't even be doing this because I think he does get into the creation of the show, from his perspective and some of the things in there. And I don't still have the book, but I do remember he had some interesting things to say about it. But Bob Newhart is not shy about standing up for himself and what works for his character. And I think he was very vocal about that and was instrumental in some of the changes that were made in the show's run. And, from what I read, I was kind of surprised, but, then I kind of remembered that everything wasn't all. There was some friction with various things. Bob and some of the other cast, Bob and the network. For a show that ran 8 seasons, it might not have run totally smoothly as you might expect.
Yeah, and the other things I found interesting in this interview, one, Barry Kemp saying they both wanted it just to be a show that was funny. So almost like the Seinfeld thing, where it's not about. He said they didn't want to do a dramedy or anything, and also that a character like Dick Loudon is a character who's not, he really can't change. Part of it, he's comfortable with who he is, but also because he's the reasonable person in a sea of unreasonable people, that the only way he could change is to become unreasonable, and then you don't have a show. But that's also part of why Barry Kemp left, because he wanted to be able to write a character who maybe grew a little more. Which
that's interesting.
Remember if that happened on Coach?
Well, it's interesting you bring that up because for a long time I associated Barry Kemp almost solely with Coach, and that's a show I did not like at all. And I think that probably made me less likely to go back and revisit Newhart because I just didn't care for Coach. And wasn't it true that he had wanted Jerry Van Dyke to play the Tom Poston, the George Utley role?
He talked about that, and the network didn't want him.
Yeah, and I don't get Jerry Van Dyke at all.
Yeah, that was where the network kind of put their foot down.
Yeah,
because and I guess MTM were being very like, you can kind of do what you want, but this was his first time running a show, and he said, working with Taxi, everything was great, and James Brooks and those people just did their own casting, and it didn't get a lot of interference that way, and so he just assumed he could go ahead and cast him. But then whoever suggested Tom Poston, he wasn't sure. Obviously, he had a different idea if he was going to cast Jerry Van Dyke for that character. But once he, saw him do it, he knew it was the right idea, and it worked perfectly. So,
yeah,
obviously, he got to work with Jerry Van Dyke anyway for many years.
Yeah,
unless he left Coach after 2 years. I don't know the history of Coach. I liked that show for a while.
Okay, well, it's Thanksgiving. I don't want to start anything. I don't want to wind up with mashed potatoes all over my face.
No, and I mean, because Coach essentially had the same style of character comedy, I think.
Yeah, well, here's the thing, and here's another thing I'll get out of the way here about Newhart. I like the show, and I think it's very funny, but to me, there's something, and I think thinking about it more, I think it was true of me back then, and it's true of me now. There's something that a little off-putting about the show, and I think part of it is I don't really like a lot of the characters, even some of the like the Stephanie and Michael characters. They're brilliant in their portrayals, but they kind of rub me the wrong way. A lot of the comedy of the show is in Bob Newhart is Dick Loudon reacting to these people who are being totally unreasonable, but that always annoyed me, and it still kind of annoys me. So I like the show, but it's not the kind of show I want to sit down and watch like 5 or 6 episodes at a time of, if that makes sense. I mean, when I was recording a lot of it, I was watching it kind of rarely, but to me, this show works a lot better personally if I'm watching like an episode every now and then, or if it was a weekly show that was on now, I might be able to watch it. But to me, it kind of builds up, and I don't really like spending time with the characters except for Bob as much. And that even kind of goes for Larry, Daryl, and Daryl. I found them kind of one note. Now I can appreciate them a little bit more and kind of like watch things about the performances, and now I've come to accept them. But there's something sort of like off-putting. I think that I can think of no other show that I like and dislike as much in a way. And I think a lot of it just I just don't connect with a lot of these characters.
Well, that's your privilege.
Yes. Well, I can take them for a half hour, but beyond that, they get a little grating to me.
I sort of get what you're saying. Was it Barney Miller or something where we talked about it feeling so dank and like a similar kind of thing, maybe. But I mean, I watched like 6 or 7 episodes yesterday, so
Okay. Yeah.
of Newhart, so I
Yeah.
guess I don't have that problem. I can see the not liking people. I mean, I don't like Stephanie and Michael, and I think I found them a little perplexing as a kid, at least at first. It may be because I wasn't watching regularly; they just suddenly were there.
Yeah.
Like, who are these weird people? And they are very strange people. Larry, Daryl, and Daryl, I did like as a kid, and I enjoyed what I saw, yesterday watching episodes. But I do feel like they kind of they became a little bigger than they needed to because they were a big pop culture thing, and
Yes.
and it is. I imagine Bob Newhart liked working with them because Barry Kemp mentioned this, that he could get laughs without even saying anything
Yes.
because they are so tuned different than everyone. And as we'll see in this episode, I mean, I think it works well, and they play with that a little too by having them feel like everyone else is weird, like that they're the normal people.
Yeah. And I do laugh at that.
Yeah, now it surprised me that, I mean, they showed up on the second episode. Like, it seemed like they were a thing that showed up three
Wow.
seasons in or something, but they're in the second episode. So
Yeah.
it's
So
along with Arvid Ingen.
yeah.
And
Yes.
so it's very interesting, and that's like, Barry Kemp didn't understand fully, where the idea or the names came from or anything, but and that the fact that it became this weird phenomenon. Like he said,
Yeah.
people would send him pictures of pigs named Larry, Daryl, and Daryl, and it just
Right.
like that. Besides the finale, I think that's the thing people remember.
I think you're right. So they took over the Minuteman Cafe, which is
Yeah.
next door to the inn after Kirk leaves, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And then they're essentially running the cafe next door.
Right. They started out as they had a company called Anything for a Buck, and they would do anything for a buck.
Yeah. Another thing about the show, and I don't think Newhart probably doesn't get mocked for this, but other less critically acclaimed shows would be, and it's very much in evidence in this episode that we're going to talk about from the fifth season of Newhart, is that whole thing where everybody gets like a standing ovation almost when they come out. And
Yeah.
it's Larry, Daryl, and Daryl. That to me, it kind of wears on me a little bit because like every time they come out, they get that ovation. But in this one, like Peter Scolari, who does a
Yes.
great job with the character, Michael comes in and they're going nuts for him. I'm like, really?
Yeah, I know.
That to me was like, that's a little much. I mean, I'm glad you're happy to be here and enjoying the show, but I don't know if he merits that kind of response each time he enters.
Yeah. He's not Kramer.
Yeah.
And I didn't like it. Kramer got that. I didn't like it. And Larry, Daryl, and Daryl, it just adds to, because they're going to have to go through. He's going to have to go through. I'm Larry. This is my brother Daryl. This is my other brother Daryl.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of waiting.
Yeah.
Just before the scene comes back to being a scene. I'm sure they appreciated it, but it's a bit much. Now, William Sanderson, who plays Larry, in my mind, is a national treasure.
Yeah, yes, I'll agree with that.
For playing Larry, for playing Lippy in Lonesome Dove, and Farnham in Deadwood. Just those three characters, besides everything else he's done.
Yeah, and he wrote a book that just came out recently. I've heard him promoting, but like not in a self promoting way, that book,
Yeah,
and he just seemed like the nicest guy. So,
yeah.
and he's really great in this because as much as I've said, it kind of annoys me how people sort of it's funny but sort of annoying sometimes that people give Dick such utter lack of respect. But he has a way of saying things that are totally bizarre and
Hmm.
even kind of like rude without making it totally unlikable. I mean, it's harder than it sounds to do that, I think.
Yeah.
And he, like Tracy Walter, was originally supposed to play that role, right?
Oh, I didn't know that. No.
Yeah, which Tracy Walter from BOTNS favorite Best of the West.
Yeah, I could see that.
And I think I forget what happened, why he was unavailable or something, but now William Sanderson made it his own and thrived with it.
I bet that's not the only time that happened. That the two of them at least were up for the same role.
Yeah, and you know what? There was another role that I think the two of them and Art Hindle were both up for,
Yeah.
and Art Hindle dropped out, and
Uh-huh.
Tracy Walter got that one. But
Was it
it probably goes both ways.
that the Joker's right hand man in Batman?
Yeah, yeah,
Wasn't that Tracy Walter?
yeah. Yes.
I don't know where we're going now. Into the episode?
Here's what I recommend. I recommend we give everybody a chance to, say a few words of thanks or whatever they need to do, and then we should get into the episode. I think
Okay.
the specific episode because it's a Thanksgiving episode, and I think this is the first Thanksgiving episode we've discussed. Correct?
Yeah.
I'm excited.
I actually do want to say one more thing from that
Sure.
interview, which is it seemed like maybe Barry Kim he was being polite. I mean, one, he said he didn't see much of the show after he left because he was doing other things and there's no time. But also being weird, and he and his staff or whoever picked the writing staff that was going to take over, and of course Bob Newhart approved of them, but he made a point that it was very thoughtful, but at the same time I think was telling that when a creator leaves a show and someone takes over, they sometimes feel like they can't grow the characters in any way.
Mm.
Like
Hmm.
they feel like they're just stewards of them.
I see.
And so the way they grow the show is by making it broader. I think this show, I happen to enjoy the broadness of it, but it certainly definitely changes after.
Sure. I think that's true. Yeah.
I mean, he also said they sort of like he envisioned it as being a six character show, but they only had five main characters. And then he realized at the end of the first season that the town was the sixth character.
Mm-hmm.
So all those recurring characters were one character, and I think the later seasons lean into that even more.
Yeah, and it's kind of easy to say that with hindsight too, and I think that's totally true. But I can imagine that being the kind of thing where if you're working on the show during the time, you might not be consciously aware of that,
Right.
and it's the kind of thing you kind of look back and like, wow, we kind of became a little broader. I don't know if it was deliberate on their part, or I'm sure some of the stuff about it seems obvious that emphasizing some of the townsfolk and using that more was deliberate. But yeah, a lot of this stuff it might be a lot easier to see looking back than it was when they were actually producing the show.
Right. I mean, because this episode has a certain amount of broadness to it, I would say.
Yes, yes.
All right. Yeah. So it's Thanksgiving for the memories, and you always know when things aired and what they aired against.
Yes, I always know it, and sometimes I even get it right on the episode and and say when that is. But it premiered on CBS, of course, November 24th, 1986, on a Monday. So it wasn't Thanksgiving, but I guess it was Thanksgiving week, maybe kicking off Thanksgiving week. The eighth episode of Newhart season 5, and it aired at 9:30. I'm sorry, no, 9 o'clock this time. So before it was Kate and Allie, My Sister Sam. Then we had this episode of Newhart. Then Designing Women, and then Cagney and Lacey. Now, other than My Sister Sam, which was tragically cut short a little bit, that seems to me like a very classic Monday night CBS lineup. That sounds right to me. ABC countered with MacGyver, Monday Night Football, and on this Monday Night Football, the Miami Dolphins beat the Jets 45-3. So not exactly a nail biter there. NBC, this is interesting, had Alf leading off, a Thanksgiving themed episode of Amazing Stories, and this is kind of tying in with some things we're talking about, a movie called The Ted Kennedy Jr. Story. And I'm not 100% sure of this, Mike, but I'm pretty sure
I know where you're going. Yeah.
Ted Kennedy was played by Craig T. Nelson in this movie.
Yeah, I remember that.
How was that? Yeah, do you
I
remember
didn't
Craig
watch it.
Nelson being Ted Kennedy?
I didn't watch it. I just remember it being on, like seeing
Wow.
maybe the
Okay.
ads in TV Guide
Yeah.
and or maybe a commercial and not knowing the Ted Kennedy Jr. story,
Hmm.
which I still had something to do with his leg, or I don't know. I'm sure it was a moving portrait of the Kennedys.
I'm sure it was. I'm a little skeptical, though, of another casting note that Robert F. Kennedy was played by Jerry Van Dyke in that movie, I think, too. I think that might have been pushing it, but
It seems like maybe they had the casting reversed on those.
yeah, I think you're right. Yes. So that was the Monday night. That's kind of this kind of getting into the Thanksgiving season. And, interesting night of television. But this, by the way, was it looks like this was by far the highest rated program of the night. So
Wow.
Newhart was popular on this night. I think Monday Night Football might have been hurt by having the mismatch too. So
yeah, so people knew the Jets stunk.
Yeah.
In the parlance of
yeah,
sports bettors everywhere, they stunk.
And one thing before we get into the episode too is that this episode was written by David Merkin, who I totally forgot was associated with the show at all, but he went on to kind of co-create Get a Life, one of my favorite cult sitcoms with Chris Elliott, and a show which was known for a lot of like surreal elements. And I think, you can see like some of the wacky characters and things like that, and odd reactions of people to other characters. I mean, you can kind of see elements of that maybe in Newhart, which is kind of an odd connection to make, but you can sort of see it. But I guess David Merkin wrote a lot of these Newhart episodes for a while, so I found that interesting.
He was a staff
on
the staff, because I guess they used, at least in the early seasons, they used a number of freelancers too. But I watched one today or last night written by Meryl Marco.
Oh wow, I had no idea.
No, and it was a good episode. It involved Michael came up with an idea for a home shopping show that Stephanie was going to host, but of course the TV station wanted Dick to be part of it too. And then he tanked, naturally, because that's not what he's good at, and he didn't want to do it to begin with, and then he got obsessed with being good at it and came on and did like a Crazy Larry kind of thing, which was fun to see Bob Newhart doing that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And by then, Stephanie was already bored with it. The show got canceled midair. Yeah, so Thanksgiving for the memories, and it opens with in the hotel, the Stratford Inn, the inn that they own in Vermont, and he comes in. He's gotten in the mail a package of new carving knives, and he's all excited about them because he loves Thanksgiving. Unlike Rick, he loves Thanksgiving.
Well, come on.
No,
it's true.
I'm sorry.
That's fair. That's fair statement.
I'm not, because the things he says he loves about it are actually things I don't really. The parade is okay, and I like the way he said something about it. Parade full of balloons of cartoon characters or something, and then he said his favorite football game of the year. Well, like that's a part of Thanksgiving I don't care for. The sitting around all day, just from parade to football to food to more football. So I'm not with him on that. And then getting to carve the turkey. And frankly, I wouldn't want to. I've done that. I don't want to do that.
Well, I do love the parade. I do love the football. And actually, he does say, I think, that Thanksgiving is his favorite holiday. And
yes.
I don't mean to be anti-Thanksgiving, but I would not say it's my favorite holiday, where Dick, it's definitely his favorite holiday.
And it's interesting to see him really excited about anything. He's a little bit of a mild curmudgeon, I would say. For the most part, and he doesn't get that enthusiastic about things like this, especially when they're like town things,
right?
Or at least as the show goes on. I think
he's almost for Dick Loudon. He's almost giddy.
Yes,
at the prospect, and just seeing the joy that these knives bring him is kind of funny in itself too.
Right. George unfortunately has some bad news, which is that the whole hotel needs to be rewired, and then Stephanie comes down and says her parents have invited them to. Wait, no, before that, Larry, Daryl, and Daryl show up and invite them to Thanksgiving dinner. And they pretend that they already have plans. I mean, I guess they do have plans, but it's just to have Thanksgiving there at the inn.
Right.
With the people they like, and not next door with the weirdos.
Yeah.
And there was a good line, like they see the knives, and Larry says to one of the Daryls, it's the perfect time to show his fledgling juggling skills.
Yeah.
And then the next scene, the electricians are giving their estimate, and there's some funny business where George seems like he's going to be a tough negotiator, and then is just so shocked at the apparently low price that they've offered that
Right.
he blows the chance of any negotiation. And then Stephanie comes down and says her family has invited them to Thanksgiving, and her family, who I guess have already appeared a number of times, but they are wealthy beyond imagination. They're sort of they live in Newport, Rhode Island. They're like that old whatever Vanderbilt, Rockefeller kind of wealth.
Yes, definitely old money,
Yeah, and
almost omnipotent.
yes, and Dick doesn't want to do that because he wants to have Thanksgiving there. He's got his traditions.
And it's kind of funny because he's already been told that, well, I guess at first he doesn't know that the electricians were planning on working for Thanksgiving, but
Yeah,
I kind of got the impression that he was fine with not having heat or lights in order to have Thanksgiving on his own terms. And probably,
yeah,
as we find out, there's just a little bit of resistance to kind of going over and spending time with Stephanie's parents anyway.
yeah, and well, and he doesn't know if he'll be able to carve the turkey. Or now, if of course, if you don't have lights, then you're not going to be able to watch the parade or watch the football either.
One would think.
George, I think, sort of invites the electricians to work on Thanksgiving, or someone says that they wouldn't work on Thanksgiving, and the guy's like, "Yeah, yeah, we would." And Joanna, Dick's wife, wants to go, and George wants to go. He loves that mansion. So Dick begrudgingly agrees. And then Michael shows up with a stuffed animal turkey, but of course he makes a stuffed turkey joke. And Stephanie mentions that the turkey will be able to meet Petey Rabbit, her favorite stuffed animal from her childhood. And she celebrates the 12 days of Thanksgiving and the 25 days of Christmas because of course she's insanely rich.
I'm willing to modify my stance on my predisposition towards Thanksgiving, but I don't know if I can handle 12 days of it.
That's a
That's
lot.
that's a little much for me.
I mean, I guess that would make the food more manageable if
Spread it out over.
spread it out over. And usually the leftovers do last a few days, so you
That's a
might
good
get
point.
3 or 4 days.
Right.
And now the retailers have expanded the window of the shopping, so that's
You're
even
right.
longer. But of course, I was in a grocery store very early in November and heard Stevie Wonder singing a Christmas song. So
Yeah.
he was actually there, which was surprising. He
Oh,
was
Stevie was at the
standing,
grocery store.
yeah, he was standing in the aisle singing Christmas songs for people.
Wow.
Yeah,
What a treat.
I know. Not expected, so I couldn't complain too much.
No, of course not.
So they head off to the Vander Kellen mansion, and we see that Dick is he's everyone's accusing him of pouting. He claims he's not, and we hear about the things they have: the indoor pools of both fresh and salt water, indoor golf, and the giant TV and stuff. The giant TV is quaint, I think, now
It is.
because everyone has that TV. But
Yeah. Now, one thing I like, yeah, he's like telling, his wife that even you would like football on a screen this big.
you can read their lips swearing.
Yeah. Now, one thing in here that I like is kind of another thing is when Stephanie and Michael are going to go. What was it? They're going to enjoy like a screening of Captain EO.
Yes.
Like I guess in the mansion's movie theater. Like sometimes like a joke like that can date a show, but
Yeah.
sometimes it's a good thing when it does. And
Right.
for some reason, I really thought that was funny. It kind of came out of nowhere. I wasn't expecting a Captain
Yeah.
EO reference.
I don't know.
And he was like, they were so enthusiastic about running off to watch it. I thought that was very funny.
Yeah. But and when Dick is pouting, Arthur Vanderkellen, Stephanie's father, played by Jose Ferrer, tells Dick he's very angry with him, and because he's built this house for people to enjoy themselves, and he says, "You almost make being rich seem stupid."
Yeah.
So, and then he invites Dick to play indoor golf, which piques his interest. And then, at least a version I watched, there was a very abrupt cut. So something might have been cut out. And it's Thanksgiving Day, and Dick's totally turned around. And that's when he's talking about the football, and he's all excited. And Arthur's going to let him carve the turkey with his knives, which of course he brought along. So I don't know if there was anything in between there. It might have just been a transition shot or, missing commercial break or something.
I'm pretty sure I watched the same version and didn't see anything
Yeah.
in between there. Or, I definitely didn't see anything that you missed. I'll put it that way.
Right. But it just like they went from one room to the other, but it was another day. And
Yeah.
I don't know why. I expected to see indoor golf on a sitcom.
Yeah.
I guess I sort of did.
Yeah.
Or at least the aftermath, like them walking around in golf clothes or something.
Or at least another establishing shot of
Yeah,
an exterior of the mansion or something like that.
yeah, I feel like maybe that got cut out. But then Stephanie comes down and she can't find Petey Rabbit. And there was some good stuff too, where Michael's like doing a turkey voice for the stuffed turkey, like, oh, gee, Stephanie. And she's like, that's not how he sounds.
Yeah. You said it's so definitive the way she said it. That was cool.
Yeah. Because, of course, I mean, she is sort of a child.
Hmm.
It makes sense. But so the parents, they say they gave away Petey Rabbit to charity, and she wants to leave, and Dick, of course, wants to stay. And I thought that was interesting that this it struck a memory that I'd forgotten, that Dick is quite often a sort of selfish person.
Yeah.
Like, even though he's the center of the show and everything, and quite often is correct in his agitation with people, he's not always perfect.
Correct.
And this episode, he's very much just about his needs.
Yeah. Now, to be fair to him,
Yeah.
it's a little ridiculous.
Oh yeah.
Her tantrum. I mean, her and her parents are kind of speaking at each other, not to each other. But like Dick, he's not Bob. He's not Bob Hartley, the psychiatrist.
Right.
Because the way he phrases things, I was kind of thinking, oh, he probably could have said that a little bit better. He manages to totally like torpedo any chance of talking her into staying.
Uh-huh.
Because he says like, oh, and I'm sure your dad realizes he was wrong or something like that. I could have phrased that a little bit better.
Right. Yeah.
But I can't say I blame him. I would have loved to have had Thanksgiving in the Vanderkellen mansion.
Oh yeah.
Seems great.
I'm sure it'd be really good.
I'd spend the whole month there.
Yeah.
I'd spend the 12 days of Thanksgiving and the 25 days of Christmas there.
Absolutely. And yeah, she's an adult having a tantrum about her stuffed animal. Like, it's not Arnold Jackson, losing his little stuffed bear, them replacing it.
Oh, I just had a thought. Do you think it's possible that Petey Rabbit wound up in Diane Chambers' apartment with Fluffy or some of her stuffed animals,
Could be.
some of her friends?
I imagine if Diane needed to add some, she might have had to buy them at a charity shop.
Yeah, yeah.
I wonder what kind of tax write-off he got for donating a stuffed animal. He probably donated so much stuff, clothes and things, that
Yeah, yeah.
he didn't have to pay taxes that year.
That's that's right.
Although he makes a joke later, like has a line later about tax reform that seemed interesting. Like, he didn't want Congress to go too drastic with tax reform.
Yeah, that was like in his Thanksgiving remarks
Yeah.
around the table. Yeah, I thought that was funny.
Speaking of Cheers, I wanted to say that this portrayal of wealth reminded me of Woody's girlfriend, Kelly,
Ah,
and her family.
that's good. Yeah, good call.
Although I don't think they were as fun as Arthur and Mrs. Vanderkellen. It was still that sort of insane
Yeah,
East Coast wealth, and she had a similar quality of being a little
vacant.
clueless. Yes,
Yeah,
vacant.
yeah, it's a good comparison. I can definitely see that.
And so they have to leave, and they go back to the inn, which of course has no power or no heat, and the only food they have is Velveeta and mayonnaise. So they sit down with that at the coffee table in the lobby, and Dick's like, I want to use my knives
Yeah,
on the Velveeta.
and he does.
Yes, and he offers the mayonnaise, and nobody wants that except for George, who thinks it'll be a great taste, which it isn't. And then Larry, Daryl, and Daryl show up and invite them to the cafe, and they begrudgingly go because they're terrified of what the food is going to be. And I found that interesting too, that even 5 seasons in, the characters are still a little bit afraid of Larry, Daryl, and Daryl.
Yeah, despite the fact that they're running a business,
Right? Yeah.
a food service business.
Maybe they've eaten there.
But they do have heat. They've got electricity.
Mm-hmm.
So those are two things worth taking a shot on, I guess.
Yes. And at the cafe, Larry tells them, "Prepare your pie holes for some taste bud titillation."
Mm.
Yeah, they're still worried, but especially at some point, Larry mentions Groundhog Day as being the day Daryl goes out and kills the groundhog that they eat. But they start serving food or putting the food out, and it's all what you'd expect. And like Dick expresses surprise. I like this. This is a recurring thing, I think, where Dick says the thing that everyone else is thinking, and then he gets put
Right.
down for it.
Yeah.
And Larry says, somebody needs to explain to him how Thanksgiving works or something like
Right.
that.
Yeah, he says that, and he also says at one point that he needs to get out more or something.
Yeah,
So it happens a couple of times where he
right.
makes comments
And no
like that.
one ever defends Dick.
Right.
I think by that point, they know he's going to take the hit for them.
Yep.
Right as they're sitting down, the Vanderkellens arrive, supposedly with Petey, but of course, in sitcom tradition, speaking of traditions, it's a replica. Now, not in sitcom tradition, it's one that he had made at one of his factories at a cost of $10,000.
Yes,
Uh,
requiring triple overtime on Thanksgiving Day
yes,
for multiple employees.
right. Which is enough to sway Stephanie's feelings. And she names him Wally. And then he invites them to go back to the mansion in the helicopter. And for one of the only times on the show, Stephanie has a conscience and says they've already agreed to eat at Larry, Daryl, and Daryl's. And Dick is very put out with that, too. But then the Vanderkellens decide to stay. The Arthur is all excited about eating at a dive.
Yeah. Gets on a swivel chair like a stool at the
Yes.
bar, yeah, and goes, wee.
Jose Ferrer seems to be having a very good time.
He sure does, yeah.
I really haven't seen him in a lot. I did see him on Columbo, and I know he's was a very well regarded actor, but he just seems to be living it up as playing this weird rich guy.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say cast against type in this kind of thing.
Yeah, and he does. He's doing that sort of like not a New England accent, but like a rich East Coast accent, and he's wearing a crested blazer. I don't know if he had an ascot on, but he it's definitely quite the portrayal. I'm sure there must be an episode set in the summertime where he's wearing like a skipper's cap or something too.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. And, that's actually one thing I don't like as much about Thanksgiving compared to other holidays is the formality of it.
Mm,
I think to me, and like even, they were all kind of dressed up over at the Vanderkellens and,
yeah,
kind of wearing suits and, jacket and tie. And, I kind of like holidays where I can just kind of go a little bit more chill and dress a little bit more casual. I think that's one thing that I didn't look forward to on Thanksgiving was having to dress up a little bit, maybe.
I could see that. And I know, besides whatever your feelings about the holiday, you're not a big fan of the fall either.
No,
You
it's not my
prefer
favorite season.
the warm weather seasons. So
Correct. Yes.
yeah, and it's certainly getting us closer to winter.
It is. For me, I think it comes down basically to the food.
Hmm.
So even though, the brothers at the Minuteman have assembled what these characters greet almost with delight, it wouldn't be all that appealing to me, even if it was totally unsuspicious.
Right. So Daryl suggests in his very formal, old-fashioned way that each of the heads of the household say thanks. So he says a very quick thing, and Arthur is pretty quick, and then Dick makes a nice little speech and is preparing his knives to carve, and then the two Daryls just rip the turkey to shreds
Yeah.
and start flinging pieces down on people's plates.
And of
And
course, get to see Dick, kind of looking around at this and just sitting there with his
yes,
knives while everybody else starts tearing into it.
yeah. Well, but they don't. They're all afraid.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
I think Arthur is the first one to try. He tries I don't know, the stuffing or the mashed potatoes or something and says it's delicious. And then they're all trying. It's good. Maybe Dick was the first one.
Yeah, well, there was a funny bit where Michael says, "I think the head of the household should be the
That's
first one to try the meal too."
right. Yeah. But of course, the joke is that the secret ingredient is groundhog.
Yeah,
But then Arthur's like, it doesn't matter. It tastes good.
yeah.
Dig in.
It was a nice scene, and I actually kind of liked it. I mean, there's a few things like the way you get some sympathy for Larry, Daryl, and Daryl because the way that you can tell that they're a little bit lonely, but the fact that they're so overjoyed to have more people there, and it comes
Yeah.
out in a couple of ways, and that they see it, they're so excited to be able to celebrate it with other people, and you do kind of get that nice sitcom thing of like, okay, unconventional family coming together and sharing this nice little moment without being like overly sentimental or anything. It's there kind of in more subtle ways, and it's funny, but it still works, and I think it makes it a really nice Thanksgiving scene and episode ultimately there at the end.
Yeah. I mean, I think Larry and Daryl are interesting too, in that they seem creepy, but they're actually like very decent people. They're just raised strangely,
Hmm.
or they have, an odd view of life. but it's not mean spirited and it doesn't harm people. It just seems like on the surface that some of the things they enjoy, like roadkill and digging up bodies from basements and eating groundhog, are not the ways of most people these days.
No.
I don't know that I would eat a groundhog, but I understand if you're raised in the country or something that might be a good source of protein.
We talked briefly about so-called urban sitcoms and maybe not as urban sitcoms early, and
Hmm.
I think even on some of the rural shows, like I don't remember Andy Griffith sitting down with a big groundhog that Aunt Bee prepared,
No, no.
or maybe Green Acres. I could see that maybe, but I think their ways, yes, their backwoods ways are a little unconventional, even for more rural type or non city type dwellings.
Yeah, I mean, George grew up in the same. He grew up in the inn.
Hmm,
Like his family are the caretakers of the inn, and even he thinks they're strange.
that's right. Yeah,
Like it seems like they moved to this very small town from the woods of Vermont somewhere.
yeah, and they're so sincere with everything that you kind of feel sorry for them sometimes, even when Dick like turns them down for something,
Yeah,
and they don't take it personally, but and that almost makes it worse sometimes. It's like
right.
can't blame him, but it's like give them a break. They do have good hearts.
But it is interesting that uh, a show built mostly around just being funny and not a lot of emotion. That I would say they and George are probably the characters that the most of that comes out. Maybe
Yeah,
for the same reasons, because he's sort of lonely and a little bit offbeat.
I think George is kind of a mixed bag to me because sometimes he's so blunt
Hmm.
and lacking like a filter
Yeah,
that I think he comes off as a little bit more nasty sometimes than he intends. But
right.
yeah, I mean, I'm not saying he's not a decent person, but just some of the things he says are so
Yeah, he doesn't have social graces,
right.
and he's a little he's like Woody without social graces,
Yeah,
or Coach without.
yeah.
He's
And
not.
not Craig T. Nelson, coach we're talking about.
No,
Yeah, Sam
Cheers,
Malone's
Coach.
ex coach. Yeah.
But I did enjoy this episode. It's a good one to add to the Thanksgiving rotation, I think.
I think so. Thanksgiving. There's more Thanksgiving episodes than I realized. I think, but I don't make it a habit of watching them like I do Christmas episodes. But
Hmm.
this is one I would definitely revisit because I really think it captures kind of the essence of Thanksgiving and all the trimmings of the holiday and kind of really gets to it while also and this is important. It captures everything about the characters. It stays true to everybody. It doesn't force Thanksgiving in. It puts the characters in Thanksgiving in reasonable circumstances and makes it all work.
Yeah. Any other thoughts? I did miss seeing Chester and Jim.
Yeah, those guys. Those these two of the like the townspeople. I think that's a
Yeah.
classic case of like usually when they're in there, they're in great doses, but I wouldn't want them. I wouldn't want much more of them.
No.
But they do make me laugh quite a bit.
Yeah. So Chester is the mayor and Jim is just his friend who says everything with a smile.
Yeah, and his delivery of everything that is funny in itself. Yes.
Yeah. And they often give give Dick a hard time.
Yeah.
And usually when they're in there also have town meetings, which are always pretty great too, I think. Because of course the town just has such odd people.
Yeah.
Officer Shiflett and Harley. I don't know if you saw any with that guy. He's just some guy who's perennially looking for work.
Okay. I didn't
And
remember him.
he's
Sounds
in
familiar now.
George's The Beaver Club with George. So he's kind of funny too. So yeah, I was glad to revisit this, and it had been a long time since I'd seen it, and I do wish it was readily available somewhere.
Maybe Shout Factory has some rights or something. I don't know, but it'd be nice if they could put it on Shout Factory TV or something. But
Sure.
we'll see. I'm positive that I think maybe it was just the first season was on Hulu for quite a while. So
Yeah.
I don't know what's going on with it, but I may have sounded a little bit more ambivalent about the show than I meant to. I still stand by that it's not the kind of show I personally would want to binge watch,
I
but
understand.
I do enjoy it. And if it was on in better quality somewhere, I'd love to go back and revisit some more of the episodes. And I have a lot of respect for it, and I like it a lot better now than I did when it was originally on, and I totally appreciate it. And if nothing else, like I said, Bob Newhart's great and everything, and his character is always funny on this show. There's always something to enjoy.
Okay. Well, enjoy the rest of your Thanksgiving if you're listening to this on Thanksgiving. And we thank you. We're
Yes,
thankful
thanks very
for
much.
having an audience. We're thankful for the people who participate in our Facebook group, as always. But we're also thankful for the listeners who are just out there listening. We're glad you're there, and I'm thankful for you, Rick.
Oh, well, I am thankful for you as well, Mike.
Oh,
I think I've said it before, but I'd rather podcast with you than with the best guy in the world.
thank you.
You're welcome. Again, that came from the heart.
Yeah.
I'm a little emotional today, but
If only the listeners could have seen the Bob Newhart face I did when you said that. Okay. Have a good Thanksgiving, everyone. And if you're in Canada, have a good Canadian Thanksgiving when that happens.
sure.
If you're in a country that doesn't have Thanksgiving, well, enjoy some other day. Boxing Day, maybe, if you're in England eventually. We don't do that here, but that's a good one. All right, and hopefully this wasn't all a dream in Bob Newhart's character's head.
You had to do it. You had to go there. You had to go.
You're the one who brought it up earlier.
I did. That's true.
Okay.
This episode brought to you by the Stratford Inn. Bucolic charm at a fair price. This episode also brought to you by Dick Loudon's How to Make Being Rich Look Stupid, with a foreword by Arthur Vanderkellen. This episode also brought to you by the Minuteman Cafe. Spend your Groundhog Day with us. Join us next time for another exciting episode of Battle of the Network Shows. Learn more, leave feedback, and suggest future episodes at battleofthenetworkshows.com. Follow us on Twitter at BatNetShows, and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Battle of the Network Shows.